Good morning, students of actual health science, presented by an actual health scientist, yours truly. 6:27 a.m. Getting an early start today because there's a lot of tomfoolery happening on the interwebs, people saying all sorts of crazy things, aren't there? Let's deal with this one. This one is called, How much dietary fibre is optimal for health? Well, that's a question that doesn't actually have a hard answer. However, the inferences, such that they do exist, seem to lead us to the conclusion that the likely answer is none. None at all. But let's hear what Conquer Aging or Die Trying channel had to say about it and see whether or not we agree with them. I suspect it'll be not.
How much dietary fiber is optimal for health? To address that, let's take a look at a meta-analysis of 14 studies.
Well, a meta-analysis of 14 studies can't tell us that because none of those studies are clinically controlled scientific observations on human beings over any period of time as it relates to the intake of fiber. None of them.
That included more than 1.3 million people. On the x-axis...
All right, so what we've got here is an absolute mishmash. An absolute mishmash there. No clear trend at all. Where on earth does that trend line come from on the basis of that data set? I have no idea. It makes no sense at all. Who produced this chart, please, and on what basis?
We've got total fiber intake in grams per day. And on the y-axis, we've got the hazard ratio for all-cause mortality.
Hazard ratio, that's the same thing as talking about risk or likelihood. These studies can't inform on that, not one jot. The participants in these studies all had unlimited, uncontrolled degrees of freedom, which are covariates, confounds, collinearities, in terms of outcomes. But okay, your so-called hazard ratio for what?
Mortality or all-cause mortality risk?
For mortality. Risk, you say, no, incidence. And that would only be true if the studies here were all unadjusted and spoke about the actual number of deaths rather than an adjusted number on the basis of some fantasy. Okay?
And here, in this dose-response meta-analysis, we can see that as fiber increased...
Yeah, but the data set doesn't underpin that trend line. It makes absolutely no sense. Where on earth did that trend line come from? Look at the actual data. It does not support that trend line. Not remotely. Not remotely at all.
Up to 40 grams per day, that was significantly associated with a 45% reduced risk for all-cause mortality.
No, not risk. These studies cannot inform on risk. It's an association which may well be easily explained with healthy user bias. People who tend to have lifestyle behaviors, factors, and things that tend to actually be healthy also tend to believe the gut-rotten garbage they're told about fiber, and they tend to eat fiber as well. Does that mean the fiber was the thing that affected their lifespan? No.
But is this just healthy?
There you go. So why didn't you just say that straight away?
Bias. In other words, do people who eat relatively high fiber diets, are they just generally healthier overall?
Yes.
Thereby accounting for this effect.
Yes.
So to address that, these studies were adjusted for factors.
Right. So they fabricated their data set to make it look like they've imposed some kind of control on their study, when in fact a scientific study imposes control before data is collected, so that you have comparative groups of people that are otherwise genotypically and phenotypically identical except for your experimental protocol. So this is not a study that can inform us on risk or likelihood of anything whatsoever. I think we're done. Less than a minute in. But let's hear the rest of it anyway, just to point to these kinds of fallacies and flaws in the pseudoscience.
That can impact the association for fiber with all-cause mortality risk, as shown
not risk still.
Here, which included BMI, smoking, age, alcohol drinking, physical activity, energy or calorie intake, and sex.
Okay, so what we have to assume, therefore, is that none of those factors share any collinearity at all with death rates. So we're done, because they all absolutely, clearly, patently do. So it's completely inappropriate. And I still cannot for the life of me understand where that trend line comes from, because it does not fit through that data set. This is stunning.
So we can see that at a minimum, 8 of the 14 studies in the meta-analysis included adjustment for sex, and at most, BMI was adjusted in all 4.
Right, so you have adjustments that aren't even universal across the studies. Apples, pears, and fruit salad, not apples with apples. Are we done? I certainly am already, but we still have most of this study yet to go. So I'm sure there'll be many more fallacies yet to correct. Let's hear those.
Of the studies. So a lot of the factors that can impact this association were accounted for in this study.
No, they weren't accounted for. You cannot adjust a data set using a multivariate regression and call that science. That's fabrication. Sorry. End of discussion on that.
But notably absent are sugar-sweetened beverages, which, as we saw in the last video, are associated with an increased all-cause mortality risk.
No, not risk.
So do people who eat high-fiber diets just eat less junk as a potential explanation for
probably
this association? And we can see that only one...
Well, we don't know what the association is, Charlie Brown. Because number one, the association that's shown here is not underpinned by the data set that it's supposed to be informed by at all. You can see that just by looking at it.
One of the 14 studies adjusted for sugar-sweetened beverage intake. Along those lines, none of the 14 studies adjusted their models for ultra-processed food intake.
What is that? How are you going to define that?
Which is also associated with poor health. So hopefully future iterations of studies like this will include adjustment for factors like...
No. Hopefully in future, studies like this stop adjusting, i.e. fabricating their data sets, start applying some scientific discipline to the way they collect data in the first place, and stop referring to their studies as being capable of informing us on risk, hazard, likelihood, or cause and effect, because they can't do any of those things. Not one jot. Not a bit. That's what needs to happen, in fact. We need to wake up. Smell the coffee. This is not science.
Sugar-sweetened beverages and ultra-processed food intake to see if it's a healthy user bias or this is a real effect. All right, so these data don't tell us fiber from what. And this study went into further detail by looking at fiber from legumes, vegetables, fruit, and whole grains. So let's take a look at that data.
No, they didn't. They asked people what their diets are. They got response from their participants by way of a survey, and they believed everything that they were told by those people who told those researchers what they've been eating. That's quite a different thing from actually looking at what people did eat. Very different indeed.
Starting with the data for legumes, as they have the most hype around them as a quote-unquote pro-longevity food. So let's see what the data has to say. On the x-axis, we've got legume fiber in grams per day, intake in grams per day, once again plotted against the hazard ratio.
Okay, so throughout the range there of 0 to 5 grams per day of legume-based fiber, we have absolutely no effect whatever. Great. That's what we would expect. What's next?
For all-cause mortality or all-cause mortality risk.
No, not risk, still.
And here, this is a meta-analysis of 4 studies that included more than 221,000 people.
So what?
So as legume fiber intakes increased up to 4 grams per day, that wasn't significantly associated with all-cause mortality risk, as we can see that their 95% confidence interval, that's the data in the dashed black lines, completely overlaps with the red line, which is a hazard ratio of 1. So it's not a significant association up to 4 grams of legume fiber per day. But at 5 grams of legume fiber per day, we can see that that is a significant association.
Statistically, is there any utility in that? Is there any real difference between 5 and 4 grams? No. Not at all.
As its 2 dashed black lines are completely below that hazard ratio of 1. So in other words, fiber intake from legumes, 5 grams per day, is associated with a 12% reduced risk for all-cause mortality.
No, not risk. Risk is a cause and effect statement still. So no. And, goodness sake, look at the data. 5 is no different from 4 to speak of whatsoever.
Now, as an example of how we can get 5 grams of legume fiber into our diets.
Well, why would you?
Just using one example, there are many different ways. Chickpeas in their dry weight, 41 grams of chickpeas per day yields 5 grams of fiber at a cost of 155 calories.
Number one, calories are nonsense. And number two, what do you mean a cost of? A cost of X number of calories. What the purple fuck is that supposed to be?
All right, next up is vegetable fiber, which is what we can see on the x-axis in grams per day, once again plotted against.
Okay, so anything beyond 8 on this chart is absolutely worthless because there is simply no data to underpin it. There's one data point there. You can completely ignore everything beyond 8 here, and what you will find is nothing convincing there whatsoever. Nothing at all, precisely because this is an associative data set that cannot inform on cause, effect, hazard, or likelihood, or anything connected to that. Also, has this been adjusted? If so, it's a fabrication, it's a fantasy, it's not even a real data set. Shall we move on?
It's all-cause mortality risk on the y-axis.
No, not risk, still.
And this is a meta-analysis of 5 studies that included more than 674,000 people.
So what?
So here, there was significantly reduced all-cause mortality risk.
No, not risk, no. And significant refers to statistically, not clinically, or of any utility.
Starting at 7.5 grams of vegetable fiber per day. But maximally reduced all-cause mortality risk was at 15 grams of vegetable fiber per day.
No, because there is no data point whatsoever at 15 to inform that claim. This is an extrapolation based on one data point just below 14. In a small-scale study. Buffoon.
And that's because, well, we can see that it's 95% confidence interval. Again, the 2 dashed black lines.
Okay, you need to stop making videos where you're interpreting science, my friend, because you've got no idea what you're talking about whatsoever with statistics here at all. You're spouting the ideologically based claptrap that you've probably been taught on how to describe these data sets, but it shows absolutely no ability to actually critically evaluate these data sets. It's laughable. Please stop.
Are completely below that hazard ratio of 1, the red line, such that 15 grams of vegetable fiber per day was associated with a 35% reduced all-cause mortality risk.
No, not risk, still.
So just as one example.
And that's an extrapolation. That's not based on any data point whatsoever.
For how we can get 15 grams of vegetable fiber per day.
Why would you?
Just using broccoli as one example, but it could be a mix of many different vegetables. About a pound of broccoli per day yields 15 grams of fiber at a cost of 158 calories.
Same argument with calories and cost.
All right, next up is cereal fiber, which is what we've got on the x-axis, all-cause mortality risk. Again,
what you've got there is a complete mess. Again, wild speculation, a lot of that. Not actually underpinned by the data set particularly at all. It's associative. And not cause and effect. It's adjusted. It's put together from a mishmash of studies with all sorts of different inclusion and exclusion criteria. It talks about hazard when it is completely incapable of informing on hazard. This is a joke, as is your apparent ability to interpret statistics, my friend, unfortunately.
On the y-axis. And this is a meta-analysis of 7 studies that included up to 1.1 million people.
So what?
So here we can see that there was a significantly reduced all-cause mortality risk starting at...
No, not risk. Still.
3.5 grams of cereal fiber per day.
No.
As we can see, that's where its 2 dashed black lines, the 95%...
Yes, we understand your facile, vacuous, childlike ability to interpret the statistics here. We get that that's how you think things are done. However, those of us that understand statistics inherently can point to the flaws and foibles in your ridiculous interpretation without breaking a sweat, as I am doing here today, by way of yet another demonstration of what is wrong in people like yourself with no skills in statistics talking publicly to people about what statistics prove. Okay?
Confidence interval is below the hazard ratio of 1.
It's not a hazard ratio because hazard is cause and effect.
But we can see that a maximally reduced all-cause mortality risk was associated with whole grain or cereal fiber intakes of 7 grams of fiber per day.
No, it wasn't, because there is no data point there. That is an extrapolation. Goodness gracious me. People wonder why I have no hair.
Shown there. So from this, we can see that 7 grams of whole grain fiber per day was associated with a 22% reduced risk for
No, not risk.
all-cause mortality. What about at higher whole grain fiber intakes? And we can see that up to 10 grams per day, the upper bound for its 95% confidence interval is significantly associated with reduced all-cause mortality risk as
No, still.
it's below that red line, the hazard ratio of 1. But note that the risk reduction is similar to 7 grams per day. In other words, the association for all-cause mortality risk at 7.
There is nothing on this page that can inform us on risk of any kind as that relates to anything whatsoever. In fact,
grams of whole grain fiber per day is similar to the 10 gram intake of whole grain fiber per day. All right, so in terms of how we can get whole grain, 7 grams, at least 7 grams per day of whole grain fiber into
why would you?
our diets, just using again one example, steel cut oats in dry weight, 70 grams yields 7 grams of fiber at a cost of 265 calories.
Same argument again.
All right, next up is fruit fiber, which is on the x-axis, all-cause mortality, again, or risk.
This is, again, just nonsense and extrapolation based on absolutely no data whatsoever beyond about 8. Actually. There is nothing on this page that I would take remotely similar, that I would take remotely seriously at all, even less than every chart you've put up so far. This is nonsense. And you really need to stop, whoever the hell you are.
On the y-axis. And this is a meta-analysis of 5 studies that included
So what?
more than 674,000 people.
So what?
So here we can see that maximally reduced all-cause mortality.
No, there is nothing on this page that can inform us on risk in any way, shape, or form. Nothing at all. No.
Risk was present at 4 grams of fruit fiber per day, as shown there. You can see again.
That's not what this showed. And again, that trend line does not fit that data set at all. Not remotely. Where on earth has that trend line been generated from? Because it's not from the data set that supposedly underpins it. You can see that just by looking at it.
The dashed black lines are completely below that hazard ratio of 1, 4 grams per day. So that was associated with a 21% reduced all-cause mortality risk.
No, not risk.
So what about at higher fruit fiber intakes? So at 8 grams of fruit fiber per day, we can see that the dashed black line, the upper bound for the dashed black line, the 95% confidence interval, overlaps with the hazard ratio of 1, the red line. So that's not a significant association.
Oh, my God. Really?
And we can see that that's true for all fruit fiber intakes above 8 grams per day.
No, we can't, because there is no fucking data there. None. For goodness sake, look at the chart. Is there any data beyond about 8? No. This is an extrapolation. Jesus H. Christ on a bicycle.
Actually, probably about 7 grams per day. So just as one example for how we can get at least 4 grams of fruit fiber per day.
Why would you?
200 grams of strawberries yield 4 grams of fiber at a cost of 70 calories. All right, that's all for now. If you're interested...
Oh, thank Christ for that. What a load of absolute fetid dingo's kidneys. What a load of garbage. You've got a PhD? Jesus! There you go, boys and girls. That's the level of what you can expect from people who can apparently get PhDs these days. What a buffoon. What an absolute buffoon. Join me next time when someone else will be less stupid than this person, probably. See you then.